Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. In this episode, we're going to look at post-truth, which is, if you're not familiar with the definition, it's relating to or denoting circumstances in which objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than appeals to emotion and personal belief. Now that may sound like a mouthful and you may think you know what that means, but in this episode we're going to kind of explore what that means. I'm going to demonstrate it to you and we're going to basically compare the post-truth of the Watts Home 2825 Saratoga Trail to the post-truth of the Watts case, and I find it very interesting. So in this episode we're going to look into how to sell a house where crime has been committed, right? We're going to look at that, and we're going to look at some aspects dealing with the neighbor, Betty Marcoux, and then we're also going to look at the route Nicole Atkinson took when she left the home at 1:48, and then we're also going to revisit the area that Watts drove by and probably disposed of some evidence, all in this episode. We're going to sort of go through these things quite quickly, but what I kind of really want to do is familiarize you guys with this sort of layout. Before we get to that, I am going to be doing a little episode just dealing with Amanda Knox's reaction to the release of Rudy Gaudet. I'm going to just do a little bit of body language analysis there, and also just talking a little bit about the irony of what Amanda Knox said, just regarding that she wished the killer would acknowledge what he did and so on. Anyway, before we get to today's episode, if you haven't subscribed yet, please do like, share, leave a comment, and let's get started. So a few moments ago I mentioned post-truth, right? And as I said, as I sort of read out the definition, it's post-truth is all about a scenario where the objective facts mean less than how we feel about something or someone's personal belief. And that's something else I kind of want to deal with, is the social media aspect, not just in terms of the Watts case, but kind of globally, how social media has changed reality, where reality is whatever you want it to be, and kind of how dangerous that is. In any event, in terms of this episode, we're going to kind of restrict ourselves to the Watts home, and we're going to kind of start off with, I think, with just a quick glance at Betty Marcoux's driveway. And all I want to sort of emphasize there is, doesn't it look like the vehicle that is parked there is parked, I'm talking about the vehicle on the left, it looks like it's parked facing the road, right? Now, that's not a very clear image. We will look at another clearer image later on. But if we go to the next image and we just look at, that's a kind of a zoomed in photo of the grid, right? And the satellite image is kind of less clear, which is why I'm just looking at that sort of street view. Now, what I want to emphasize here are two or three different things. First of all, if you look where 2825 Saratoga Trail is, it's slightly offset to Steeple Rock Drive. Now, unfortunately, in this graphic, you don't see what that sort of dark grey road is, but it is actually Steeple Rock Drive. It's the road that sort of meets Saratoga Trail in a kind of a T-junction. So that's the first thing I want to emphasize, is that the house isn't sort of plumb with that road, Steeple Rock Drive, right? And I'll explain to you in a moment why that's important. The other thing to emphasize is, if you want to return to, return to 2825 Saratoga Trail from the highway, which is south of this grid, then you need to go around that roundabout, which is kind of on the right hand side. Can you see it over there? Right? So you would go up to Wyndham Hill Parkway, that road, and then you would go around the roundabout. And so if you were trying to exit the neighborhood, you would go around the roundabout, and then you would go either south or north to wherever you wanted to go. Longmont, I think, is to the north. Erie, I could be wrong, is, I think, to the south. I know North Glen is definitely to the south, right? So when Chris Watts returned from Roggan, when he returned from the well site, then he went up that road, right? He went around the roundabout, and then he took Wyndham Hill Parkway. And this is where it kind of gets interesting. He didn't come down Steeple Rock Drive, and we know that for a fact because in Coonrod's body cam, you don't see the truck coming down that road, which is the obvious way, for the shortest and obvious way for him to come down, right? It's a two-way street, but he doesn't come down that way. Instead, he comes down the sort of left side or east side of Saratoga Trail, right? And the reason is because he went via Black Mesa Road. Now, in order to get to Black Mesa Road, he needed to drive kind of a circuit, right? Does that make sense? He needed to take Steeple Rock almost in the opposite direction. I guess there were different ways he could have gone. He could also have gone Wyndham Hill and then up and then Emerald Drive and then down Black Mesa Road. But the point is he was in Black Mesa Road to dispose of that evidence. And that is why he came down this way. Now when we look at this slide, which is kind of a aerial photo, which comes to us courtesy of Denver 7, and I'll put a link in the description just so that you can watch the whole video. It's a really good little video clip showing various shots of the home, but also describing the changes of finances. But it's also something else that is almost just stated by the way that I want to kind of emphasize in this post. But in any way, in this particular slide, look at the circled area. That is the Watts home. As I say, it's offset to Steeple Rock Drive. In other words, it's slightly to the one side of it, right? And that is important because when Betty Marcoux's vehicle drove by Chris Watts, right, and she went up Steeple Rock Drive, he immediately drove forward and then turned the truck. And when I was studying the Trinastich video, I kind of thought, wouldn't Betty have seen these headlights shining towards her? And I don't think she would have because the house is offset in that way. Now, on the one hand, you might say, wouldn't Chris Watts have wanted Betty to see the headlights shining behind her, almost implying that he's now leaving, he's left home, right? The other side of it is, well, but what if he was going to now reverse back into his driveway, which he did quite quickly in the space of 30 seconds? And the answer is she couldn't see it because it was offset in the way that it was. And I'll probably show you some other photos just to kind of emphasize that. But once again, in this slide, you can see Steeple Rock Drive is not quite plumb. It's not quite perpendicular to the Watts home, certainly not to the driveway. So as the title of this video sort of emphasizes is, how is the post-truth of 2825 Saratoga Trail equal or similar to the post-truth of the Watts case? It's basically just the fiction or the beliefs people have of this house after what has happened here is the same as the way people kind of think of and believe in the case itself. And I think the point to emphasize is that whatever those beliefs are, they are changing over time. And what is very interesting about this video on Denver 7 is they sort of talk about when enough time has gone by, people will sort of have forgotten what happened at this house. And there's also a way that people that are interested in selling the house, whether it's the bank or whoever it is, there's also a way that they can help cloud or contaminate or change or reshape the public opinion around the house, right? And a couple of examples are that they can change the number of the house from 2825 to something else. They can paint the house a different color. So they can change the address, they can paint the house a different color. And I think another one of the suggestions, and this is at about 3 minutes 46 seconds in the Denver 7 clip, they can even sort of change the garden. They can sort of plant trees and shrubs and just kind of start altering the sort of outward appearance of that house, right? In other words, what they're saying is you can change the reality of what happened in that house by changing the outward reality so that it just looks like a different house. And of course, you haven't changed anything. I mean, the history of that house is the history of that house. You can't change that. But what they are hoping to do is sort of alter the post-truth aspect to the house, where you either don't think it's very important or you don't really connect it in a real way. And what is interesting is there are other houses with something similar. For example, the Ramsey's home in Boulder really looks very, very different now compared to 24 years ago. And I remember when Dr. Phil was outside the house in 2016 on the 20-year anniversary, and it just looked totally different. There was a lot, it felt very foresty. There was a kind of that sort of the openness of the front garden was very closed, with a sort of a black wrought iron fence, and just totally different to how it originally looked. And so what people are counting on is that you will forget the original images of that house and kind of look past that and sort of see it as a different place. And of course it's not. And of course, if the media keeps up the sort of anniversaries and the coverage of a case, which tends to happen in high profile cases, people aren't going to forget very easily the scenario. Even if the house itself changes, the neighborhood might not change that much. And so that is working against these efforts at actually creating post-truth. And I mean, make no mistake, you can make money out of post-truth. You can make money out of people's ignorance. You can make money out of shaping people's opinion in a way that they think that, well, that's something to think about, I guess. And right now, Chris Watts is trying to shape public opinion as well. He's trying to, I guess, work on people's amnesia to some extent. And obviously, if he can do that, then he's going to benefit, right? Now, again, you might not think that this is such a big deal, but what happens when we are living in a post-truth age where you can make up a political scenario, whatever you want it to be. So real things that are happening in the world aren't real, and you can kind of just snap your fingers and sort of, buy Facebook ads, and people are going to find out that whatever they believe is true, and you can kind of manipulate people in that way, telling them what they want to hear effectively. And Chris Watts was very much that kind of person, a kind of a post-truth person, someone who was used to telling, for example, his wife what she wanted to hear, his mistress what she wanted to hear, law enforcement what he thought they wanted to hear, and look where he ended up. So this is another image from the Denver 7 channel, and you can see more clearly now the vehicles on the Betty Marcoux side, and you can see that vehicle closest to the Watts home does look like it has been backed up into the driveway. And I think one of the reasons why that's the case is because of that awkward T-junction that is there. Because if you now had to reverse out into the road, you're sort of reversing into kind of an intersection. And so it's preferable that you would go into that intersection nose first. Does that make sense? So I'm just saying it just would make sense to, just for ease of access, to drive forward out of that position. Now in the case of the Watts home, what I think more typically they would do is they wouldn't even bother to go up Steeple Rock. They would tend to just drive along Saratoga Trail away from Betty's home in the direction of the Trinasich home, and then follow the road back towards, I think it's the Wyndham Hill Road or whatever it is, and then up to the traffic circle, right? So in other words, otherwise what they would have to do is kind of make a 3-point turn in the road to sort of go back the other way. And that is why I say it's quite important that it is offset, okay? The house and the driveway are offset, and from this position you can kind of clearly see that the driveway doesn't even slightly line up with Steeple Rock Drive, right? And so when Chris Watts reversed onto the driveway just as Betty Marcoux drove off, she wouldn't really have seen that he was reversing onto the driveway. She probably would have assumed that he just drove off the way that he normally went, and that is probably something that he wanted her to assume. And then the final thing I want to bring your attention to is the fracking battery that is really very, very close to the Watts home. It's sort of just around the corner. It's sort of probably barely half a mile away. Now, I remember seeing some footage where people curious about the Watts case were filming the area, and you sort of saw these tanks through the passenger window. But I was never really sure where exactly they were, and now this confirms that. This confirms kind of where they are. Now, if you look at that line coming from the Watts house to the tanks, and you go sort of to the left of that line, that sort of road that is coming down, there's actually almost like a double highway that is going to the highway that would take Watts to Roggan, right? The roundabout's just sort of out of sight to the left, just off frame. Now, it's just interesting to think about is, what if Chris Watts had dumped the bodies in those tanks? And, I think there are a couple of ways to think about that. One of them is the cadaver dogs did go to that site, as far as I'm aware. Actually, I could be wrong. I think the cadaver dogs went to a pumping jack, a black pumping jack. I don't know whether they specifically went to those tanks, but what I do think is quite interesting, just from a hypothetical scenario, is that Chris Watts had the tools, he had the know-how, he had the access in a sense, and that site looks like it's quite accessible, that he could have done what he did at the well site, he could have really done there. And the only problem was, obviously, what he did at the well site, he did with, miles and miles of farmland, empty farmland around him. So there was no one that was going to watch him. Whereas if he tried to do something here, you had, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Basically, that entire patch of land was surrounded by houses, and the best way that he could have brought that about was if he did it like at night, like in the middle of the night, and I don't know how illuminated that site is at night, but he wouldn't have necessarily been GPS tracked to where he was. So if he'd used the Lexus, for example, he wouldn't have been GPS tracked. So I'm just saying that is quite a kind of a scary thought. If he had gone for that alternative, maybe there would have been a different outcome here. So the point I wanted to make with this video is basically to say the post-truth of 2825 Saratoga Trail, which is, how do you sell this house that's got this reputation? How do you change the truth of this house? And the answer is you can slap a coat of paint on it, you can change the garden, you can change the address, you can do all of these things that alter the veneer. and that is how you change the post-truth of it. In other words, you just change the surface layer, and then people can be kind of misled about what something really is, right? That is how you change the post-truth of the House 2825. How do you change the post-truth of the Watts case? Well, by doing exactly the same thing. You sort of just change the surface layer. You just change the garden of the Watts case. You just change the if you want to compare the number or the address of 2825 Saratoga Trail to the kind of personality of the people involved, right? The kind of the identifying traits. You just change those, so you can make Shanann into this controlling, sort of very triggered, intense person or whatever, someone who drank a lot. In other words, you change something that is a fact or something that is a certain way into something else. And then you also change Chris Watts into whatever it is. And that is how the post-truth changes. And you can only do that when people don't really know what the original is, when that is kind of murky, when people have developed amnesia, when people can't find their way to the facts and the truth, and they're not quite sure where to go to find it. And I do think when someone comes, for example, to the case, they haven't been following it from the beginning, where are they going to go? Well, wherever Google leads them. They're going to do a Google search, and whichever channel or whatever gives them the most hits, they're going to think, oh, well, this is probably where I'm going to get information. And do you think they're going to get accurate information there? I'm talking about where there's the most information. Do you think where there's the most information, that information is accurate? Or is that information post-truth? Or does that resource have elements of post-truth? I'm not sure if I've mentioned it, but when Nicole Atkinson left the property, she also drove the route that you would have expected Watts to drive, all things being equal. In other words, following Saratoga Trail, then looping back up, meeting the Wyndham Hill Road, and then going around the traffic circle. That is the route that you would have anticipated he went, and he didn't go that route. One thing that Trinastich said in when he was alone with Coonrod, or when Chris Watts had left and he was with Coonrod and Nicole Atkinson, was he basically said, why did he reverse as far back as he did? He didn't just reverse into the driveway, he reversed with the back end of his truck kind of protruding inside his garage. Why did he do that? Well, obviously because he was trying to conceal what he was loading into the back of his truck. At the very end of the Denver 7 clip, somebody says, when enough time has gone by, another family will just move in. In other words, when enough time has gone by, amnesia will have set in, post-truth will have set in, and people will then feel comfortable that whatever happened in the Watts home didn't happen, or it doesn't really matter to them. Another neighbor was saying that she wants the whole property torn down and made into a little park, and that is completely changing the reality of what happened there. Now, I'm not saying that you should leave the house exactly the way it is. I'm just saying all of these are kind of attempts to reshape reality, to reinvent or narrate the story in a way that isn't the original story. And I think it also is showing the tendency that people want to forget. They want to move on. They don't want to be reminded. And I think that is a mistake. I think we should be reminded so that we can learn from these mistakes. The part I want to emphasize to you guys is that you guys play a big role in whatever the post-truth becomes. In other words, if you just go along with what certain people say, if you don't think critically, if you don't care about objective facts, if you don't mind someone just talking into the camera and not referencing what they're saying, not referring to the discovery often and carefully and specifically, then they are going to influence and shape public opinion in a way that appeals to emotion, what people want to hear, but in a way that amounts to post-truth, in a way that amounts to changing what actually happened into whatever they want it to be. And to the extent that you allow that to happen, that is sort of part, you are sort of part of that. And I want to kind of ask you to think about that. Think about to what extent you are allowing the wool to be pulled over your eyes, and by doing so, you're also allowing the wool to be pulled over other people's eyes. And bear in mind, that is what Chris Watts wants. He wants the wool to be pulled over people's eyes so that people aren't sure what happened. And in a court case, defense cases can be won just by bringing in doubt. If there's a little bit of doubt that things were this way or that way, it benefits the defendant. And so how are we going to have certainty in this case? Sorry, that's my dog in the background. How are we going to have certainty in this case is by remembering the facts, by being clear about the facts, by knowing who to trust in terms of where we get our facts from. Okay, I'm not going to take it further than that. Thank you for listening. Bear in mind, I'm going to do an episode on the Amanda Knox case. Also on Thursday, I'll be starting a new series on YouTube reviewing the timeline of the John Benet Ramsey case. If you haven't subscribed yet to this channel, please do like, share, leave a comment, and I'll see you guys next time.